First item is approval of the minutes from the August 29th.
Also move.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Seeing that there's no public comment, I would like to just make a motion to move the chairman matters down on the annual report so that we don't impede Mr. Boltman, his presentation.
Great.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Well, the first item of the new business would be the update on the union negotiations, both in the police and the Teamsters.
Both of those will probably be going to mediation in the fact that there has been protest over the wage component. I will say that in the Teamsters negotiation, our negotiating team, I think, did an extremely good job. The Teamsters have acknowledged that the defined benefit plan will go by the wayside. We will freeze it in place and go to a defined contribution plan. We have proposed to them a 7% city contribution, and the employee be required to make a 3% contribution, and then obviously they could make whatever contribution they want to over that. But what it does is it tags our exposure going into the future to that 7%. The other areas, some of the things, that was the big component that the council wanted us to try to work toward, which I think is successful. The other is they wanted us to capture 2 of the holidays. We have conceded and only take back 1 of the holidays. And but the pay component, the salary adjustments, both police and the Teamsters will be going, and we will be going through that mediation process and ultimately back to the city council on that. We were obviously offering nothing, and they had numbers ranging from 5 to 9%, depending on how you talked about it. But I think all in all, we've done fairly well in what we did. We eliminated the triple time overtime issues, took care of all of that problem, and I think we redefined what the city's exposure under those contracts would be, both in the police and the Teamsters. But again, I think we had a good negotiating team that took care of that and sat down. Cindy was part of that process. Rob was part of the process. Jason Odom was our lead negotiator, so we feel very good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yes, the health insurance and taking away the 3 tiers, going to 2 tiers. Now, one of the things that we did concede, and we did this on a timely fashion, is, for example, the pension plan would go into effect October the 1st, 2014. Because it's going to take us some time, we have an attorney under contract that will help us do the freezing of the defined benefit plan and then transfer over to the defined contribution. We'll be going out hopefully in the next couple of weeks with a request for proposals on some groups to provide the defined contribution plan. In the union, the Teamsters Union, they wanted a Teamsters plan that they have, which we have conceded to, which will be part of the contract. The good thing is that the city would not be responsible for any investments. It would be totally up to the employee between them and their union as to how those investments on the defined benefit or defined contribution plan would go.
A question on the mediation. Is it only to the wage issue, or is it other aspects? To
the wage. What we did is we checked off in the police situation. Their contract, we negotiated that last year, but we left a wage opener as part of that contract, and so they have exercised that, and we could not come to an agreement, so they have the right to go. In the Teamsters, we checked everything off, but the wage issue.
Jim. This plan, this defined contribution plan, that's going to be a subject to mediation.
No, that's not. That's a done deal.
That's a done deal? Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, is it a strictly a defined contribution, or is it a 401k type?
It's like a 401k, and that's exactly what it is, 401 or 457, one or the other.
All right.
I think the one that the Teamsters have proposed that's run by their union is a 401k or an A. But, I mean, essentially, the city's entire responsibility is to make the percentage contribution that we've agreed to, and that's it.
And they've agreed to 7%, that the city would pay 7%
And they would
of the
pay,
salary.
correct, and the employee would contribute 3%. We were pretty insistent on employee contribution to that plan. And the way we also looked at it now, new employees, after the signing of the contract, will contribute 5%. The city, that gets to the 12 that everyone said that was what we really needed in order to make everyone whole. But the city's 7% would remain the same even into the future.
Jim, what was the reasoning about the Teamster running it? What was the logic of that?
Glenn, I don't know. They had their own plan, and it's one of those that they had faith in doing that, which is fine with us because
That's off city off a little bit of the hook.
Absolutely, because it will be part of the contract, and so they will be totally responsible for their contributions and how it's handled and that kind of stuff. So yeah, we feel very good.
Are the terms of that commensurate with what the terms would be for our individual employees?
We had folks look through it, and in our opinion, there were some costs in there that hopefully we won't occur when we do our defined contribution plan. But that was totally theirs. They brought that to the table, not us.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's a plan that's run by an investment management company that works for the Teamsters. It's 401 style plan, the DC plan. Our exposure is limited to making the percentage contribution that we said we would as a percent
And
of
it's a
salary.
national plan, I guess, huh?
Apparently, it's fairly large. Apparently, because it's run by their organization. So, but that's what they wanted. I mean, as Jim mentioned, we intend to go out with an RFP for a defined contribution plan for those employees that are not covered under the Teamster contract, so that the non-union employees, of which there are probably 100 or so, maybe.
It takes us out of the cost of creating one too. So.
Exactly.
That is correct.
No plan documents.
Takes
no.
us out of that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Now, we still have one, but now we've offered 401s and 457s under the ICMA and those type, and we'll probably get some bids in. We anticipate at least 2, probably ICMA and the Florida League of Cities as at least 2 that should be the ones that we can work with. The real irony of this is that you could have a couple of those. As long as there's no cost to the city, we don't really have an objection one way or the other. But the Florida League offers a few little components that should be attractive to employees in working out where you are in your career stage and how your investment portfolio should go and that kind of stuff. So they offer a little more review and consultation.
Good.
When do you think this mediation will occur?
I think we have November the 17th.
I think that's the police one.
The police. 17th.
Okay.
Anyway, we got the police coming up. We just reached impasse with the Teamsters just Tuesday or Wednesday.
Okay.
So it's just beginning.
And then, are all the employees in the city represented by Teamsters, or is there a different type of union for some of the others?
Well, you got the police union, which is totally different. Then you have the Teamsters that have the administrative people as well as the blue-collar workers. So you have they represent the great majority in numbers of employees.
Teamsters, okay.
And all management, exempt employees are non-union.
That is correct,
Okay,
as of today.
So AFSCME and this other governmental union that I hear about, they don't represent any of our employees then?
No.
Okay.
We have the Teamsters and the Police Benevolent, PBA.
Okay.
And then they have two bargaining units, one with the lieutenants and one with the rank and file. We settled with the lieutenants, and the rank and file are the ones that have protested the wage.
I see.
Thank you, Jim. I'd asked Rob to make a presentation on the septic tanks proposal. I don't know what familiarity that you have with any presentations that he's made before, or Dan?
I haven't.
So the bottom line is that, as you know, the lagoon is becoming, now that the hopefully the issues of the electric are ebbing, that the hot button throughout the Treasure Coast is the lagoon, and there is some evidence that the septic tanks are a contributing factor, particularly those that are pre-1980, the older septic tanks, and those that are near the waterways. But with that, Rob?
We gotta wait till screen
They're
comes
not
up.
coming up. They're on the dais, but for some reason they're not coming up on the.
They're not coming up on there? Okay. Give me a second here. I'm going to go through this pretty quick because it was a long presentation, but I'm going to kind of just hit the key points on it. If you've been following along, with the newspapers, you can tell that there's been some issues on the lagoon. And one of the, let me see if I can get this in the slideshow mode here. Jump back and forth. A couple of the items that came up was fertilizer, septic tanks. Reuse has now come into it because people have been looking at the reuse and saying, what are the nitrogen levels and phosphorus levels in reuse? Stormwater, of course, is the big key contributor, probably more than all the other ones combined right now. Stormwater is probably loading up your lagoon with nitrogen, phosphorus, different types of bacteria. But with that, I was kind of charged with one of the items was to look at septic tanks. And we've been working on septic tanks probably since I've got here back in 2000. Normally what would happen is people would come in and want to go, their septic tank fails, they want to get off their septic tank, so they ask us to see if sewer is available. And through timing, nobody ever has septic tank failures at the same time on any given street, so people go through polling their neighborhoods, looking to see if people want to connect to sewer, and most people don't want to spend the money at that time, and then they invest $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 in their septic system, and then a year later, 3 doors down, that person runs into the same problem with the septic tank, so he comes and sees me and says, oh, by the way, there was a guy in here a year ago, and did that go anywhere? And we'll usually pull it up, and I say, no, sir, you voted no, and therefore it didn't, so the same with most of the people in the neighborhood. So the only way to really look at septic tanks as a whole is to do it as, one type of a program. With that, there leads to the problems of what's the cost of it. You're going to spend tens of 20s of millions of dollars to do something, and then pass all that cost onto the homeowner. And a lot of times there's a huge investment that you have to do to tear up the streets, put sewers in down the middle of the road, and because you're tearing up the street, you put all the service laterals in because you don't want to go back in and open cut a brand new street and tie it in the future. And so your upfront cost is usually 85% of the cost of a septic, the conversion process. So when the discussions came about, there was one little street on the barrier island called Shore Drive, and one individual came in and said that, hey, most of the people in my neighborhood want to connect, and can you do an analysis of what it's going to cost? And so I did, and went out and met with the homeowners in that area, and they showed up, and it appeared to me right off the bat that a lot of them, the cost was going to be one of the issues, even if it was on the barrier island, because it was, why should I invest in this now? Why should I spend $15,000, $20,000 now? Can you prove to me that there's a problem with the lagoon? And so as we were discussing, the whole process, it also appeared to me that a lot of them were very familiar with their septic systems and what the costs of replacing them were. And at that point, I realized that whatever program we put in place needs to compete on that level of a septic tank system replacement. So with that, I'd like to go through this quickly. I gave this about a month ago, and more or less the lagoon is used as a recreational facility. More than 70% of Florida's recreation occurs in fisheries and stuff like that in the lagoon area, or our estuaries throughout the state of Florida. 2/3 of our fish and shellfish are consumed by humans. Recently, there's been discussions on seagrass loss, elevated nitrogen levels, and unexplained deaths of manatees and dolphins. Pollution of lagoons through discharges of nitrogen, phosphorus, and bacteria from multiple sources. Appears right now that the public is fixed on nitrogen, but phosphorus and the bacteria are just as important things to look at. Sources of nitrogen in the lagoon are through atmosphere, through lightning, precipitation and dust fall, plant and animal residue compost, wastewater plants, mineral fertilizers, septic tanks is the last item. Usually you'd find that under item 4, but I pulled it out so that we could discuss it separately. We have no immediate control over items number 1 and 2. Nitrogen enters the lagoon through stormwater runoff, grass clippings, reclaimed water, septic tank effluent. Phosphorus enters through the lagoon through stormwater runoff, reclaimed water, septic tank effluent. Bacteria enters through the lagoon through stormwater runoff and through septic tank effluent. So you can see that the two key contributors or the conveyors of pollution is stormwater and septic tanks. Recently, down in Lake Okeechobee, they had a meeting, and the Secretary Vineyard from DEP, and the big thing was that they were discussing the freshwater discharges to the lagoon as being a problem. And the first thing that came out of his mouth was, if you woke up this morning and flushed the toilet and you have a septic system, you contributed to the problem. So if you look at it from the regulatory standpoint, they consider septic tanks just as important to look at solving an issue with them than they do with the Lake Okeechobee discharges. He also stated septic tank systems work fine to 1 and 5 acre properties. It's not the septic system that's the problem, it's the amount of septic tanks, the densities, and the location to the lagoon. Variables in a septic system are density, proximity to the lagoon, the elevation of the water table, distance from the septic tank to the water's edge, the year the house was built, flow direction of the groundwater, and whether or not there's irrigation systems using shallow wells in the area. I don't know if this is going to work, but we'll see real quick. It does. If you look at the pink and the green on your screens, those are all the septic tanks in Indian River County. You're looking right now at the Sebastian area. This is the Vero Highlands, or Vero Lake Estates, I'm sorry. This is kind of the central part of Indian River County. And now you're looking at, right in here is the barrier island where Vero is. And some of these outlying little areas here is where we have some septic systems. I can't see this from here. Hopefully you can see it a little better. But roughly this breaks down the septic systems to the areas within the county. Vero Beach roughly has 5% of the septic systems total for the Indian River County. So as you can see from the previous map and table, the city is not the problem, just part of it. However, I'd like to say that probably the city is most proactive in at least the discussions and everything else going on with the septic tanks than you see in other areas. I can't get to that one. What do we know about septic systems? The average level of removal of nitrogen is roughly 28%. Phosphorus is about 57%. And there's really no removal of the bacteria. So that'll be removal later on, soil conditions. And nitrogen loadings from single-family residence on a 30-acre lot, and that's the average size in Vero Beach is a 30-acre lot. So you get roughly 5 pounds of nitrogen through the atmosphere. If you use the model ordinance that the city just passed, you would get 43 pounds of fertilizer going on your lawn, and then a septic tank would produce roughly 36 pounds. That's for a family of 4. It's 9 pounds per person per year. So you can see that the septic tank loading is just as much as the fertilizer. The problem is the septic tank is putting the nitrogen in the water below the root zone of the plants, so there's no uptake. So then it's
absorption.
Just going right down into the water table and eventually to the lagoon. Mm-hmm. What can we do to reduce levels? Reduce fertilizer concentrations in stormwater. Reduce plant decomposition, the grass slipping issue, blow it up on your lawns. Reduce animal decomposition, pick it up. Educate reuse users to cut back on fertilizers. If you irrigate with reuse water, you religiously irrigate, in other words, you have a program where you're irrigating all the time with reuse water, then there shouldn't be any need for you to fertilize. There's enough nitrogen in the reuse water to more or less meet the model ordinance requirements. Now, if you only irrigate when it's the drought periods with reuse water, you really need to look at, you're going to have to supplement with fertilizer.
With fertilizer, yeah.
Reduce septic tank effluent from entering the water table. Items number 1 and 2, which was the fertilizer, and I can't remember what the other one is, are being addressed by the City Council at this time. Oh, grass clippings. Item number 3 has been addressed by providing collection stations in dog parks. Item 4, we will handle through reuse mail-outs. 5 is the topic of what we're talking about. I'm going to skip this. This was a septic tank. What does it look like? It's kind of like a video if you want to watch it.
I've
it's
installed
online.
them. I know what they are.
Yeah.
I know what they are.
There are 4 types of sewer systems that we could look at. One is the conventional gravity sewer, which is what is in Vero. You install manholes, pipes in the street. People install 4-inch lines from their home to the street. It flows downhill to a lift station and eventually gets pumped to our wastewater plant where we treat it. That's the most popular. It's the lowest maintenance cost. However, it is the most costly to install after the fact. If it's a brand new subdivision, it's cheap. Right. You know, that you're going to be building the roads, so you put it in before you build the roads. If you're coming in later on and you're tearing up the roads and you're working around all those other utilities and driveways and people coming back and forth to their homes, 1, it's very costly, and 2, it's very disruptive, and people don't like to go through the hassle of having it installed. Second is a vacuum system, which fairly new. It's been around for a while, but it never gained popularity. Now it has. It runs about 70 to 80% of the cost of a gravity sewer system. Same kind of concept, except for there's smaller sawtooth type design pipes installed, not in the roadway, but alongside the roadway. And then there's little collection pits installed at each property line or common to a property line. People run a 4-inch line out, and then it acts as a vacuum. It opens up a valve and sucks the waste out. It hasn't. There's not enough time involved in it, but different type of reporting as to you start getting into the maintenance of each one of those valve pit evacuators. It can be very costly to rebuild them over time. So grinder systems, they're a pump. So you gravity flow to a tank in your yard, and then everything is ground up in that tank and then pumped to the wastewater system. Very high maintenance because of the aggressiveness of the pump design. There's high maintenance on the pumping system itself. Usually you have to have larger pipes because you are grinding all the solids into so that you have to have larger pipes to convey that to a wastewater plant. Then there's the step system, which historically has been a septic tank with a pump inside the second chamber of it, and you just pump the effluent off. gaining popularity all over the place because you then only have to treat the effluent, and in a lot of areas of Tennessee, other remote areas where there's not a central wastewater facility, they can put in neighborhood types treatment package units that then treat the waste. And there's, like I said, pods of them all over the United States these days. What I've been looking at is a combination of the step system with leaving the septic tank system in place. One of the problems with the step system would be if you lost power. You then lose the power to the pump, and you could back up into your home. Therefore, what we were talking about was why a step is low maintenance, competitive pricing with septic system replacement, lowest upfront costs. These are listed. This is really the design that we're looking at. If you take the house with the existing septic tank, and this is the existing drain field, and you install a little pump basin in this between the two, then you can pump the effluent off before it gets to the drain field. But the drain field is there for the power outages or a pump failure or anything that would occur. So you would remove 99.5%, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but at least 99% of the nitrogen loading going into the groundwater table. The problem with this design is it's a combined, right here still the septic tank system is in place, and now we have a connection to the wastewater plant. And up until now, the state of Florida never had an issue with that. So all their Florida statutes are written around either you have a septic tank system or you're hooked to a sewer plant. Since this is kind of a combined system, we would have to go in front of the Florida statutes, or in front of the state of Florida to have the Florida statute amended. It's been amended before. They amended it for the Keys to sewer that area. They just amended it 5 years ago for the Central Florida area to change some of the requirements on septic tanks that discharge into springs. So it's not uncommon to change that Florida statute. And that would be something that the Utility Commission just passed last week, a recommendation to have council engage the representatives in this area to look at changing that Florida statute in January. The reason you're here today is, we'll skip this, is kind of the design. That's what the pump system would look like inside of the tank. One item of concern for this body would be fairness of rates. We looked at this over, I looked at this over a 75-year replacement cycle and looked at what the cost of replacement of our gravity sewer system is versus the replacement of pumps and the panel over periods of time. And they're very close in a monthly cost. So for our gravity sewer customer, it's roughly $12.42. For the customer that is on this one is $13.18. I would consider that's the same rate. I wouldn't try to charge one rate to one customer versus the other if they're this close. If they were $4 or $5 off, I would say yes, you would have you have a different customer base. This is the cost for installation for a residential homeowner. So where we had a $20,000 gravity sewer cost to a resident, we're down to roughly $7,200.
That's about a septic tank cost for a smaller house.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was the goal, was to try to get something competitive. If you looked at a replacement of a drain field, they're running $3,000 to $5,000 for the drain field. If you had to go to a mound system, you're in the $6,000 to $8,000 range. So the $7,200 is maybe a little bit on the high side of a drain field, but it's right in line with the mound system. And now you've resolved an issue instead of just reinvesting in something that's a.
I put a new one in at 720 painted bunding, and it cost about $8,900. That's with new fields, new pits. About that same cost.
Yeah. If we have to replace the tank also, it's about $1,000 more. So it's right in line with what you're talking about.
That's about right. And that was a
Can the
three-bedroom
cost be
house.
amortized?
3 baths.
Well, what we're looking at doing, and this is, I haven't talked to my boss 100% on this one, but the 2-inch line where, and one of the things that the next slides will bring it to you that, but we'll talk about it now, is the program that I was looking at was installing the 2-inch mains in the streets to make it available, and only doing that right now. And then when somebody's septic system fails or has to have a repair permit or something goes wrong, not a pump out, but not a lid that gets cracked that they got to replace, but something that's either the drain field or a structural problem with the septic tank, then they would be required to connect to this system. They're going to be spending money at that point. They're going to be faced with a multi-$1,000 bill. So that's when we would look at doing it. So the $600 that we're talking about for the 2-inch line availability, we would look at an assessment program, so that would be over 20 years. The step equipment, which is $3,000 here, we would want the same, since we're going to maintain that pump basin and then we're going to put the pump out of the septic tank on a schedule, we would want the same step equipment. So whatever equipment we decide on, we would then be consistent. We're going to own it, and I want to have the same pump that I go out and replace. So we would become the warehouse at that point for ordering X amount and then selling them to the septic tank contractor to install. Right. That part could be financed. So, we're at roughly now half of the price we can finance. The other half, which is the electrical connection and the step installation or the $3,500, that's going to have to be borne by that person, which in essence that's what they would be paying for a drain field replacement anyhow. It's not like the city would be the bank in that case. They would have to pull out their credit card or do whatever they're going to do with that septic tank contractor, and the septic tank contractor would be the person that would be financing, however, or the bank or something like that. So we do have some flexibility there. And I think we would try to do the best that we could with being flexible, because ultimately the lagoon is, the pride and joy of Vero Beach. I mean, it's something that Vero gains money through tourism through. So you would want to make sure that somehow we can preserve it. So,
isn't there also a human factor involved when you talk about replacing septic tanks with a sanitary sewer system? Health and hygiene, with the infections that can happen when septic tanks break down, the feces. I mean, at least I went through this in the Midwest, sitting on a government board up there, and that was a big problem. But the soils were different. Up there were more clay in the hardened soils. Down here, it's sand, and they think so. Maybe the health and hygiene factor isn't as great down here. Do you have an opinion on that? Or?
Yeah. The whole Florida statute was designed around the health and hygiene issue, and it was to protect the groundwater source. So if you didn't have a central water system, you couldn't have the septic tank densities that you have in this area. But because once they changed this back in the 90s, it used to be that you installed septic and wells, but you had a larger density. You couldn't put, or a smaller density. You couldn't put them except for on half-acre or larger lots. When in the 90s, you had a lot of complaints from the realtors that the GDC areas and a lot of the Avatar developments that were allowed to build on quarter-acre lots, they couldn't develop them because of these distances from wells. And so in the early 90s, they changed the code, and back then they weren't looking at lagoons, they weren't looking at estuaries, they weren't looking at pollution. They were solely looking at the health and welfare of the individuals, and they were being pressured by the building industry and by the real estate industry. And they opened it up. They said, if you put a central water system in that area and your pre-1972 lots that were platted prior to that, you can go to 100% density. So that opened it up for the Palm Bays, for the Sebastians, for the Vero Lake Estates, the Vero Highlands, all of them to go in and develop all those lots as long as they had central water and build septic tanks in those areas. So, you'll see that a lot of these density changes changed after that 90s. Prior to that, it was GDC had an agreement with the state. We'll build 30% of the homes in a subdivision, then we'll bring water in. Then we'll build to 66.5, and then we'll bring the sewer in. And that was the agreement they had with the state. When they went bankrupt, and they were the largest land developer in the entire state of Florida, that's when, in the early 90s, they changed all this, because GDC wasn't around to do those investments, and the realtors and the builders were calling it dead dirt. They say, that lot's useless. It's worthless. Can't do anything with it. So, but yes, you had a hygiene stuff, but that didn't address the concerns of the lagoon, and which, like you said, that plays into the health of the lagoon, plays into the health of Vero Beach. So.
But it's interesting. People are talking about it. As a realtor, we hear them. We hear them saying, "Are we on septic or are we on sewer?" So there appears to be far more concern